And thank you all for coming, and welcome to the Connecticut Historical Society. This is what I am hoping is going to be a fun evening, and I'm having a little museum geek moment that I get to sit up here with three really wonderful representatives of museums across our state and talk about curating and collecting the weird. So I hope that you had a chance to go upstairs and see our exhibit That's Weird, or you've seen it before. That exhibit came about because we had this opening in our exhibit schedule, and we had been doing a number of shows where we were really crowdsourcing a lot of the material that went on display from community members. We weren't pulling so much from our collection here, but we were reaching out to the community and asking them to share their experiences of growing up, or other organizations identifying 50 objects that represent the great stories of Connecticut. So we knew we wanted to have an exhibit that focused on our collection. And when we talk about our collection, the Connecticut Historical Society was founded in the 1820s and really started actively collecting in the 1840s. And if you were to count every single photograph, and every single piece of paper, and every single dress, and every single sheet, and every single sock, and every single plane, we have about 4 million objects. And those objects often don't go on display. You know, you can only show so much at one time. And so we started as a staff talking about, well, what are our favorite things in the collection? When we go into the storage rooms, what do we find? And every one of us had, oh, I love the murder map, or I love that massive Masonic temple painting, or did you know that we have these medical items? And with that, there's also the other side of, often when we take visitors into our storage rooms during our behind the scenes tours, visitors like you will often remark, that's really weird, or why do you have a coffin hanging out in your furniture aisle? It's a corpse preserver, not a coffin, slight difference. And so we hear this thing, this refrain of that's weird, that's odd, that's crazy, or it's just crazy how much you have. And so after a while we were like, well, that's it, that's our show, that's weird. And so that is what is upstairs. But we also thought that we needed to explore a little bit more the concept of weird, and the fact that what's weird to us today in 2018 might not have been weird when the object was created, might have become weird over time, or is no longer weird once we understand its context and its story. So looking at a pair of shoes made from a Revolutionary War flag, supposedly made from a Revolutionary War era flag, might seem really odd, but if you think, like today, if someone had a Revolutionary War era flag and they chopped it up to make shoes, we would kind of be horrified. Why did you do that? But for them, when they did this in celebration of the Revolutionary War, the story that came handed down to us with these shoes, they saw it as a way of actually honoring this great American event. I'm like, what? Like, where's the flag? I want the flag. I don't want a pair of shoes, you know, but different way of looking at it, different perspectives and different point of views, which is so important. So that's how the exhibit came to be. And I'll just share two of my favorite things. So one is this great leach jar that we have on display and would have been in a pharmacist's shop. Would have been used to have leeches for bloodletting or other medical purposes. And what's really interesting is since it's been on display, I've had two people tell me how leeches were used in current day medical procedures. One, her father cut off most of his fingers in a snowblower accident, and they applied leeches to keep the blood flow going, and he has full use of his hands. So this thing that I get really creeped out by the thought of leeches. Like, it is just like skin crawling, creepy, but it has a great medical purpose. The other object is not yet in the collection, and that is the head of Chompers, one of the mascots for the Hartford Yard Goats. And the story about this, how we got is when we were doing the exhibit, we wanted to have a section on should we bring these items into the collection. You know, we haven't stopped collecting. We're constantly collecting the history that's being created. And so we reached out to the yard goats and we said, can we have your mascot? It's off season. We can have him for the run of the show. And they were like, nope, sorry, he's used for publicity. We can't do it. And we're like, all right, fine. 2 weeks before the show opened, we get a call. And you'll notice if you've seen it, that they decided to replace it because this one had been so dirtied and slightly beaten up. And so they were like, do you still want it? So immediately we said yes, went to the exhibit designer. We're like, you got to build a mount, you got to find space. We're putting this in the show. It's 2 weeks away. We're doing it. And I think he's one of the great highlights. And then, of course, we had Chompers, the mascot, here during the opening. And for any of you who were at the opening, you got to cha-cha up the stairs with Chompers to the exhibit. The fact that I had a baseball mascot at an exhibit opening is now one of the highlights of my professional career. So without further ado for me talking, I would love to hear from our panelists, and I will introduce Melissa Grafe, who is the John R. Bumstead Librarian for Medical History at the Harvey, Cushing, John Hay Whitney Medical Library at Yale University. And I thought I had a really long title. It's a very long title. If you have not been to the, keep that up for a second. I'm going to show two more things. If you've not been to the Medical History Library, it's a really fascinating place to see tons of medical oddities. So in her position, Melissa manages the staff and the stellar collections, oversees major digitization projects, and assists students, researchers, and faculty with their research using the collection. Melissa received her PhD in the history of medicine from Johns Hopkins University in 2009. She has served on the Council on Library and Information Resources, known as CLEAR, postdoctoral fellow at Lehigh University Library, and followed by an appointment as the Humanities Librarian at Lehigh. She's currently co-chair of the governance board for the Medical Heritage Library, an online digital consortium that makes hundreds of thousands of books on the history of medicine freely available on the web. And I asked each of the panelists today, what is the weirdest thing you ever tried? And Melissa's was touching an African cockroach.
Hissing African cockroach, which I remember, so museums, right? Remember going to a museum, I don't remember which one it was, and they're like, here, and they just threw this cockroach into my hand. So it's left a permanent experience, memory, experience in my mind, and it's, yeah, that's good for right now, yeah.
You didn't like it?
I actually didn't mind it. I
There you
just
go.
didn't know what to do with it. Like, what do you do with a cockroach in your hand?
So I was a freshman in college taking bio for poets, as we called it, for all the humanities majors that had to take biology. And if you walked through the basement of the building, you had to pass by a huge case of these. And as a freshman, I didn't realize the other entrance to the building. And once I found the other entrance and avoided the case of these every day, I was much happier going to bio. So thank you. I think I have Fred up next. I'm trying to think of what my slides are. I don't have a slide for you, so it must be Fred.
'Cause I didn't get your message.
So in the middle is Fred Calabretta, who is the Director of Collections Management and Senior Curator at Mystic Seaport. He served as co-curator for Mystic Seaport's long-running signature exhibition, Voyages, Stories of America and the Sea, and has curated a number of other exhibitions and has published 2 books and numerous articles. Also an oral historian, Fred has conducted hundreds of oral history interviews and taught oral history workshops in 20 states. And I believe he's traveled to even more than that just on his own, right? Yeah. He is currently curating an exhibit scheduled to open at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. this April. It's based on the story of a Connecticut whaling captain who spent many years among the Inuit. Fred's primary subject interests include Arctic whaling and exploration, the inland waterways and rivers of the American West, and the sea and popular culture, including music, movies, and advertising. So this is what Fred said to me, that one of the weirdest was probably a demonstration in front of his 4th grade class putting his pet alligator to sleep by rubbing its stomach.
Oh.
It really works. The class then woke the alligator up by clapping. However, for the record, the stupidest thing that he's ever done was preparing to shoot a cowboy hat off of his sister's head with an arrow. thankfully, his mother came out in the yard just in time.
Wow.
So weird and stupid.
Yeah, wow.
To my immediate left, this is Bob Burns, who is the director of the Mattituck Museum in Waterbury, a position he's held since 2012. Bob is vice chair of the City of Waterbury Mayor's Art Advisory Council and vice president of Main Street Waterbury. He also serves on the President's Regional Advisory Council at Naugatuck Valley Community College, the Waterbury Community Investment Program, and the boards of the Connecticut Arts Alliance, the Hartford Art School Endowment, the Washington Art Association, and the Waterbury Development Corporation. Burns has also, Bob Burns,
Yeah,
look
how do
at
I get
that,
him
I don't know. Bob has been a juror for the New Britain Museum of American Art, the Washington Art Association, and the Canton Artists Guild, and he recently curated a group show for 5 Points Gallery in Torrington. Bob joined the Mattituck following 10 years of service at Olana, New York State Historic Site, and the home of Hudson River School artists and connected to Hartford. Hartford boy, Frederick Edwin Church. A native of West Virginia, Bob has been identified as one of the 50 most influential people in Litchfield County by Litchfield Magazine and received Main Street Waterbury's Community Partnership Award. So Bob did not tell me what he wanted ahead of time, so I don't have a picture, which might be okay.
Probably good, yeah.
But he's decided that the weirdest thing he ever tried, he loves to travel to France, was andouillette, which is a sausage made out of tripe.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, it's gross.
And so I figured if I asked them that, I would share my thing, which I was in Japan in 2013. I had a great privilege of when I was a junior in high school hosting a woman who's a year older than I am for an entire year, an exchange student. And in 2013, finally made the trip to Japan to visit her family and spent a day with her parents, who were thrilled to show me around and took me to a Japanese fish market where she presented me with these small dried fish that you eat whole. And I couldn't offend Miho's mom because it's Miho's mom. And so I shoved it in my mouth and ate it. And to this day, I'm not really sure what I ate. I don't even know if it was really this. This is dried sardines. It looks like this, but my memory's a little off. It was 5 years ago. So yeah, just picking out dried fish from a big container and it was unusual. It tasted actually okay. It was just unusual.
The andouillette didn't taste okay.
All right. So I am now going to turn it over to, so tonight what we're going to do, let me explain. Each of our panelists will present a presentation about their collection, and then we'll wrap up with a little conversation, and then of course open it to some questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We'll just wait for my little slide presentation to come up. And I will warn some people in advance. There's some, because of your warning upstairs, there's some things in my presentation that are in our collection that may be disturbing to some people. And I'm being very serious about that. And I'm going to apologize to you because we have a stuffed alligator in our collection. And he's made it in there too.
That's what happened to mine too.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah.
It's one of my favorite things. So this is the Mattatuck Museum in Waterbury. We are officially the Mattatuck Historical Society, and we just do business as the Mattatuck Museum. We haven't used that name except officially for a really long time. We're celebrating our 140th anniversary this year, December 22nd, 1877. The fathers of Waterbury, the scions of the brass industry. This was the year of the sesquicentennial of the founding of Waterbury, and they decided that they should meet and form a historical society for the betterment of the people of Waterbury. And so they had this meeting in order to decide that they would have an historical society, and this is from the original minutes book, page 3 of the original minutes book of that first meeting. And the names are all those are the proprietors of Waterbury's mostly sons and grandsons. Just to show you what the museum is like, we have a dual mission now that we're the Mattituck Museum, art and history. So we have a really nice collection of predominantly Connecticut art and artists from colonial to contemporary. And we do changing exhibitions of contemporary artists. And we do have a 5,000 square foot interactive history exhibit telling the history of the Naugatuck Valley from a little before 1700 when we bought the property to today. The word Mattatuck is actually an Anglicization, that's such a hard word for me to say, of an Algonquin word, Mattatuck, which is actually easy for me to say, which means the place where trees won't grow. The founders felt that this ancient name of the area that the original settlers, the land grant that they purchased from the Tunxus Indians was known to them as Mattituck or Mattatuck, and so that's why our name is Mattituck. And Mattatuck, Long Island is the same Indians, they just row across the between, and it means the same thing because Mattituck, Long Island's in where a bunch of rivers come together, and it's very wet. Now moving on to weird. So one of the first things I did when I got to the museum, this is our parking lot, so if you come to visit us, you'll park here. There were these little bricked over windows, and we were having some issues with people loitering in our parking lot and doing bad things. And I had heard on NPR that if you put up eyes to stare at people, they'll stop doing that. So I decided to blow up 3 portraits from our portrait collection. That's Frederica Chase on the left, Lemuel Hopkins in the middle, and Sarah Pritchard, a very important woman in the history of Waterbury. She helped probably wrote most of Anderson's History of the 3-volume Anderson's History of Waterbury, which we quote all the time. So I put their eyes in the windows, and you know what? It worked. The sign that says you're on video cameras and the video cameras did not work, but this worked. And actually, it's kind of, we hear from the visitors a lot that they either think it's really cool or it's really weird when they pull into the parking lot. So now I'm going to get to my little speech here. So when they first came together to form the Historical Society, they chose to collect the historic manuscripts, biological specimens, and archaeological artifacts. And then during the period of U.S. expansionism, the society chose to collect objects which reflected the country's experiences with foreign lands and unfamiliar cultures. And so that's why we have a fully taxidermied alligator who's smiling. I love his smile. Can you see his smile? It's really pretty. And to his right is a mummified raven from an archaeological dig in Egypt, which probably should go back to Egypt at some point, but I don't know that they want it. So we have several mummified animals that were taken from that dig by one of the sons of one of the scions of the brass industry and brought back to his historical society. And since I was in our collection storage, well, one of our 3 collection storage facilities, I thought I'd take some pictures for you. If you come to the museum, we have open storage in our history exhibit, and the best of our collection is in the open storage. But if you go back into this room with me, which is super cool, but very difficult to get to so we don't take big crowds like you guys do, you get to see a lot of the interesting things that are probably very similar to what's in the storage here at the Connecticut Historical Society. Objects such as dollhouse furniture, and items that were either manufactured or some aspect of them were manufactured in Waterbury up here, these cans. I was glad to see your curling irons up there because we have 3 shelves of curling irons. And in the middle, we have a large holding of Native American artifacts in our collection. And if anyone knows anybody in any other Native American museum that is interested in us repatriating things to their locations, that would be great, because we have very little from Connecticut Indians, and we have a lot from the rest of the Americas. And we are working right now to try and repatriate things to other states that are not a part of our mission. But this is some of our best beadwork that we have right here in storage. So, oh wait, well, I can tell on this thing. I actually just put the hand and leg irons up there for you because they're actually called the Mattatuck, which I think is great. Many of the things that we do in Waterbury are not finished products. Over the history of Waterbury, we've been working with metal since the beginning. In fact, Platt Brothers in Waterbury is the oldest continuously operating manufacturer in our area, and they've been making zinc buttons since 1735, I think. And so we work with metal and we give it to other people to finish it, except for a few things, one being buttons and the other being clocks. And so, oops, go forward. A guy who actually started both of those things got the contract for the buttons for the War of 1812 and spun off a company which he then called the Waterbury Button Company, which continues to this day to actually have the contract to make all of the brass buttons for every branch of the armed services in America and for almost all of the police and fire departments and stuff. So this company that started in 1812 is still actively headquartered in Waterbury and producing in Cheshire. Back there in the corner, you see a lovely 1940s desk clock from Timex. So the other business this guy created was the Waterbury Clock Company, having stolen some very ingenious people from Eli Terry to form his own clock company, which eventually became famous for the dollar pocket watch. Which revolutionized pocket watches, put one in every person's pocket in America, and ultimately was purchased by the Olson family during the Second World War and turned into Timex, which still is headquartered in Middlebury, but they do their manufacturing in the rest of the world. So buttons are a big thing for us. This is our button museum on the third floor of the museum. We have, in this particular collection, there are 10,000 buttons that were collected in the 1930s by a curator hired by the Waterbury Button Company to get the best examples of buttons in the world to inspire the workers of the Waterbury Button Company when they were going to work to make buttons every day. So these frames hung from the entrance gate to the work floor, and they would walk past them being inspired every day. The good thing about that is that they were well preserved, and we got the 10,000 buttons, which are now available for you to look at. The bad thing about that is they were only used to inspire, so we don't know anything about these buttons. We don't know where they came from. We kind of know what most of them are made from, and we don't really know why these particular buttons were collected by this curator. So it's a mystery for us still, but if you come, you can spend a lot of time looking at buttons. But not these buttons. So this is one of the sets of buttons from our button collection, which is not on view at this point. And if you can read that, I'll read it for you. It says 19 buttons made from human skin, circa 1916. And so there was a fad in the 19th century to make human skin bound, you might actually know more about this than I do, books and valises, usually from convicts that were executed, and then the contents would be the tale of what they did bad and how they ended up, or it would be a record of that. A lot of there are some that have been verified as human skin books in America, in Philadelphia, I think.
There's a census actually going on. It's very hard to verify human skin books because they look like leather.
Right.
And most people won't own up to having a human skin object or book, human skin book. So there's a census, a very quiet census among the librarians and archivists. I think they've identified at least, I think about 80 books, certainly in America, that are verified having human skin. Some we know the stories of, some we don't.
Yeah, and we've done research to look if there are other human skin buttons.
I've never heard of
and
buttons.
we can't find them.
Yeah.
But there was a fad in the early 1900s for novelty leather buttons. And so we're thinking that perhaps somebody commissioned this novelty button that either may or may not be actually made from human skin. And we are in the process
Doing
of
some analysis
sampling.
in that,
Yeah. And it actually used to be really hard to do that analysis, but now it's easier. I can't actually even think of the science that they do it with, but it's easier to tell most of the time if it's not human skin, if it's some other hide. So that's what's happening here. I'm going to be a little grisly here with our collection. This is a very early part of our collection. This is a handwritten book that a doctor in Waterbury Preserved Porter had, and it is his anatomy of the art of dissecting the parts of the human body. And you can actually read, like, the first thing is like, the body is made up of bones, which are white brittle things. It's a very interesting early, and it's dated 1789, I think, or 98. I can't remember at this point. But this belonged to a guy who was Preserved Porter was born in Waterbury, and was a bone setter by trade, and his father, grandfather, great-grandfather were all doctors back in England, and then his family continued the tradition. His son became a doctor. That son had a son who was a doctor, and so this Porter family was a very important family in the history of Waterbury and continued to have a connection to the museum because in 1933, the five greats granddaughter, and here's your little thing. She was one of the first women to graduate from Johns Hopkins as a medical doctor. And she learned the bones from this skeleton that she had inherited down from Preserved Porter. who actually dissected this human body using his anatomy. This was a slave that belonged to him who died, and so he, in 1789, he kept the bones as an anatomy for the city of Waterbury, anatomy school for the city of Waterbury, and then passed it down through his family for several generations until it came back to the museum, where it then was put on display with his tools of the trade as a slave. And then eventually, I guess they felt bad for him and they let him sit for a few years before they then put him in a box. At some point in Dr. Porter's day, all of the bones had the Latin names written on them, and they were still there in my day. But somebody with a different hand at some point wrote Larry across the top of the skull. And so he was known as Larry. You can actually see it says Larry on the thing there. And many people still come and talk to me about Larry because he was on display until sometime in the probably late 1970s. Larry got put into a box because it seemed inappropriate to have a slave on display. And fast forward to 2012, actually 2002, when they had just finished doing an oral history project with African Americans in the city of Waterbury who were 80 years old or older, as a combined project with the NAACP. And then a woman who was leading that project received this postcard in the mail and said, you know, this is the African American you need to learn about, Larry. It's amazing that this was the postcard we sold in our gift shop. And I bet people bought a lot of them. And it's filled with false information. For instance, it says that he died in 1789, but he actually died in 1798. And it says that many people in Waterbury owned slaves, and only 5 families owned slaves in the whole history of Waterbury. So we know a lot more about this skeleton. His name, the gentleman's name whose skeleton it is actually Fortune. He belonged to Preserved Porter, we know from records. He had a wife and 4 children. When he died by drowning in the river, he was turned into this thing. And so eventually, I'll make this the shortest story ever. In 2012, my staff came to me and said, we'd like to bury him. And I said, okay, let's do it. So we had to get a death certificate, even though he'd been dead for 200 plus years. And so we sent him to Quinnipiac, where they did forensic testing, learned a little bit more about him because the science keeps getting better. We have a 3D printing of the bones, and we took him to the church across the street where he was baptized in 1797, and had a service, and then we buried him in Riverside Cemetery, which was great. And if we need him again, we know where he is. So moving on from that, this is actually really cool. This is a reproduction of an advertisement from 1792, and I'll just quickly read it to you. Inoculation. Any person desirous of taking the infection of smallpox may be well accommodated by applying to the subscriber, who is a very convenient house for that purpose, where careful attention is given and every favor gratefully acknowledged by their humble servant, Abel Bronson. This was an advertisement for people to take the smallpox, and if you survive it, then you'll never get smallpox. And if you die, then you die. So people were choosing to go to this pest house, which is what they were called. Oftentimes, a village would build a pest house and force people with communicable diseases to go there until they either succumb to the disease or get better. And each pest house had its own cemetery. And lots of New England towns had pest houses. This was one being run as an operation to help people by infecting them with cowpox, which was similar to smallpox and would give you an inoculation against smallpox. They would go there and they would wait, and they had a lot of time on their hands. And so they actually spent a lot of time carving their names in the doors while they were waiting to either succumb or get out. So there's amazing 18th century graffiti on this door that we have from what is now Middlebury. It was Waterbury at the time. And you can see, I think that Richard Cutler wrote his name first, and then Richard Skinner just wanted to make his bigger. And then Sheldon and somebody whose last name is Birdsey was there. But there's lots and lots. It's really one of the coolest things that we have on our display at this point. So now getting out of the morose. In 1600 BCE, the Mesoamericans started using the sap of a rubber plant to make things. But it wasn't until the 1700s in France and England that they started to try and make things with what they were at that point either calling gutta percha or India rubber, which was brought back from Mesoamerica, is what we call Central America now. And for about 150 years, people were putting on rubber shoes and rubber coats, and they were sleeping under rubber tents that when it got hot, they would become sticky and they would melt. And when it got cold, they'd become brittle and they would break. But then comes this guy in the portrait here named Charles Goodyear, who makes it his life's work to figure out a way to stabilize rubber. And he succeeds by putting together some incredibly dangerous compounds, sulfur and arsenic, with the rubber, and getting really, really angry and throwing it at, this is the apocryphal story of how it was invented, throwing it at the fireplace and it got stuck. And then he went to bed and the next day he got up and it was solid and it was stable. And so then he took it outside because it was freezing cold in Massachusetts at this point. He's in Lowell, and he nails it to the door and leaves it there for a week, and it doesn't become brittle. So he realizes he's invented a way to make rubber a hard, reliable substance. But people have been wearing rubber things for 150 years, and it was never any good, so nobody wanted rubber things. So in order to try and get some backing for his newfound thing, he created a pavilion, a room about the size of this room, out of vulcanized rubber, filled it with a suite full of furniture, all created out of vulcanized rubber, and bookshelves, similar to these, only they were much taller, made out of vulcanized rubber, filled with books that were printed on rubber pages and bound by vulcanized rubber covers, and shipped it off to the Crystal Pavilion in England, looking for backers, didn't find any. Then he moved it over to Paris to the Universal Exposition of 1852. And while he was there, he also didn't find any backers, and he ended up in debtor's prison. Yes, I know, it's sad, right? Because he had his kids with him and his wife, and he had to go to debtor's prison. But before all that happened, he went to the famous American artist George P.A. Healy, also known as Little Healy, if you've read the David McCullough book about the Americans abroad, to get his portrait done, which is the portrait that you see here. But unlike all the other portraits that Healy did, this one's on vulcanized rubber, which is a really great surface for painting, because we've never had to do anything to this painting. It's a kind of amazing thing. So this is one of the few objects that returned back to America, and then the other is our famous rubber desk. The black surface is vulcanized rubber. It has inlaid brass and real gold drawer pulls. The drawers actually work. The locks work. And it's a wooden frame with vulcanized rubber veneer, basically. And it's the only remaining piece, because the Stan Hewitt Museum in Ohio has a commode that they've let completely fall apart. So it's not really. It doesn't exist as a piece anymore because it's such a mess. The way we got this is because when he came back to America, because his wife died, they let him out of debtor's prison, he brought his kids back in this desk. And he was still looking for money. He went to his relatives who had a business in Naugatuck, which is where he's from, and sold him the rights to use his patent for vulcanized rubber, and they started making rubber products out of that. And then they got the desk. That company, which became American Rubber, ultimately became Uniroyal, which made, in Naugatuck, they made the rubber bottoms for Keds, sneakers. But Uniroyal is most famous for tires. But all that happened way too late for poor Charles Goodyear, who died, unfortunately, in debt, a broken man who never got to see the genius of his invention. The desk stayed in Naugatuck until Uniroyal moved to Detroit in, I think, the 1980s, and then it came to the museum. So it's a real treasure in our collection. And then they're also the people that invented Naugahyde. So here's Naughty, who was in 1963, I think, was invented to sell Naugahyde to you and I, and want us to put it on our chairs. This is the creature that supposedly provides the hide for the Naugahyde furniture. And that's my speech.
So we're going to move on to Fred.
Okay.
Do you want to sit closer to the screen? I can move. All right.
Okay. Well, just a little bit of quick background about our collection, and you can see from the numbers here, we have about 500,000 items total, including a lot of photographs, and then and things like 500 boats and ships, and I'm not going to run through all the numbers here, but the collection is extensive, and we also have extensive library collections as well. This is some of the storage area. And as you'd expect from a maritime museum, we have lots of ship models and lots of scrimshaw. We also have textiles and paintings. And we have much more. We have whaling and commercial fishing gear, furniture, ship and boat parts, tools, almost everything associated with the American maritime tradition in some way. We have small objects. This is a ship model in a flashlight bulb, and you can see the size compared to the pencil tip. And we have large items, the whale ship Charles W. Morgan. So the size range pretty much covers just about everything. And we have unusual objects. In some cases, they're not extremely unusual, but I think it's unusual that we have them. And this is a case in point. It's transmission fluid. Now, why do we have transmission fluid? Well, because until 1973, every car in the United States that had an automatic transmission had fluid in it that was primarily composed of whale oil. That ended with legislation in 1973, but what that means is I learned to drive in a car that had whale oil in the transmission and didn't know that that was a connection at that age that I had to whales and whaling, as did millions of other Americans. So it's an ordinary object, but the context makes it pretty weird, I think. I mean, it's just something you wouldn't expect to find. And it's also an example of how something like this can be informative. We actually have this can on display in an exhibit now on whaling, and in a section that addresses the changing perceptions of whales. So whales have come from a creature to be hunted as a resource to a creature to be protected. And this can of transmission fluid kind of represents that changing perspective. So it has value, educational value that way. I also like popular culture material, and I was very pleased upstairs to see movie posters and a comic book, and you see a couple here. And again, they're not weird objects, but why does a maritime museum have a Disney comic and a surf party movie poster? Well, if you think about it, and we do, that in the 19th century, the way most Americans interacted with the ocean was as a place of work. They were there for sort of a functional purpose, on the basis of transportation, to get from one place to another, as a fisherman, to carry cargo, whatever it may be. There was recreation, but most Americans interacted with the oceans as a place of work. There's been a tremendous transition, and today most of us interact with the ocean as a place of fun or recreation. And so this comic book and movie poster, not in their own right weird, kind of represent that story and might not be something that you'd expect to see in our collections. Now, sailors traditionally have always brought home souvenirs, and that gives us a nice foundation for weird and unusual stuff, because sailors have done that, I think, since the beginning of time. They have access to remote areas where most people don't go, and they have an opportunity to see things and bring back sort of evidence that they have visited these places. And this is a case in point. It's a narwhal tusk coat rack, and a narwhal is a type of Arctic whale that has a single tooth that projects from its mouth, usually single, sometimes rarely, I guess, two or three, but usually one. It's often known as a sea unicorn because of this single tusk, has a lot of sort of mythical associations with it, but and it was certainly exotic. So these were brought back as souvenirs, and again, this is a case where there's more to the story than that. The New London Whaling Fleet specialized in Arctic whaling, and the New London Whaling Fleet supported every American Arctic exploring expedition in the 19th century. So New London and the Arctic are very strongly connected, and this represents that connection as well. And this was made by a very prominent New London area whaling captain. Another sailor souvenir, this is an insect wing bracelet. And I don't think we know much more about it than that. I'm not sure that we know the culture, but just kind of interesting iridescent insect wings. a painting on a leaf. This is about, I think, 7 or 8 inches long, and it's an actual whale ship, the Francis Allen. And so this was painted, I think, in South America, and as a souvenir item. It's probably the smallest painting in our collection. And we have this cradle, and the cradle is made from a sea turtle shell. A captain made it for his infant daughter, and we recently had it restored and on exhibit. But again, another sort of exotic sailor souvenir. And also in that category is this seal or walrus intestine raincoat. It's Eskimo or Inuit produced, and is very stiff and dry now, but was flexible and apparently worked pretty well when it was new. So the sailor souvenir category is I think, a good one in our collections for finding the unusual. But there are a few more strange things. There was a man by the name of George Newton who paid a Provincetown whaling captain to bring him a whale, and he did. And he had it shipped on a specially made rail car from Provincetown to Boston. And he did this because he decided he wanted to tour it around as a giant whale show, which he did, and he called it the Inland Whaling Association. The whale traveled to Cincinnati, Chicago, throughout the Midwest, and all this happened. I think the whale was taken in late fall or early winter. So this all happened during cold weather. But then spring came, and the weather got warm, and the whale got pretty nasty, and he noticed that his crowds were getting smaller. And he actually made an attempt to embalm the whale because he knew he had a good thing going. He wanted to keep it going. He tried to have it embalmed, and that didn't work. But for about 5 or 6 months, he literally got a lot of mileage out of this whale. And we had this collection with all of his promotional material, his contracts, letters, tickets, and these large broadsides. So this is kind of a unique collection. Now this is. I don't know if any of you might know what this is. I mean, one hint is that it obviously looks like some sort of mining. Well, what it is guano, bird droppings. This is one of the islands. There are several islands off the coast of Peru. There are others in the Pacific that have literally decades, if not centuries old deposits of bird droppings, which are very rich in nitrate, and were harvested by the United States and other countries and marketed as, in this case, soluble Pacific guano, used for fertilizer. And you can see that it was recommended for all these things, for gardens, for fruit, vegetables, your lawn, although lawns weren't too big at that time, but grasses, tobacco. So again, you have a major industry based on the harvesting of bird droppings. And so that's a little bit of a twist. This is one of about 24 models that we have made by a man named Alexander Law, and we've had these since the 1960s, and about 3 years ago, someone who used to work in Mystic Seaport contacted us and said that he had acquired Alexander Law's papers, and would we be interested? And we said sure, and it just gave us great documentation for the models, including about I think a 20-page essay on his model building and how and why he did it. And one thing that we learned, you can see that the models are very small. You can see the pencil there. He couldn't always find thread thin enough to suit his purposes, so he used human hair, and he used black hair for the what's called the standing rigging, which was tarred, and then blonde or brown hair for the running rigging for the other lines. So this model does have some human hair in it. Some of the others do. The collection is great, and at one point, Walt Disney, who was obviously fascinated in miniatures and things like that, tried to buy the collection from Mr. Law, made him an offer, and Mr. Law turned him down, which was interesting. He didn't think the offer was high enough, and so eventually the collection came to Mystic Seaport, and I think, you know, that if that happened today, I doubt that Mystic Seaport could compete with the Disney Corporation in terms of paying for the collection, but it's an interesting collection. Another different item here, underwear, and you know, I think if we have textiles and costumes in our collections, we have some underwear. This is unique underwear, though, because it belonged to Richard Henry Dana, who actually went to sea, spent time at sea. We have his hat, we have some other material, but the most unusual in that group is this long underwear. We have whale parts. These are especially popular with school groups. The kidney stones and the whale eyeballs are two of our definitely most popular items. They're about the size of grapefruits, and you can see that the kidney stone is even larger. And we had it analyzed at one point, and I forget the details of the results, but it apparently is most definitely a whale kidney stone. When the whales were processed, they were cut up, and so that's when things like this were found, and so kind of a unique item. In the 1940s, a British naval ship saw a sea serpent, and that's what they said. And these were not, weird people or quacks. These were respected officers in the Royal Navy, and not just one person, but a number of them saw what they described as a sea serpent. And they described it in the official log of the ship and in their correspondence and written records, and so it was taken very seriously at the time. And these paintings, we don't know a lot about the paintings, but they are 19th century paintings. And so they may have been painted not too long after this event. And the event has been the subject of a lot of research. There were detailed newspaper accounts of this. And the thinking now is that, that there's a logical explanation, and, could have been several dolphins or something like that. But the British officers were sure that they saw a sea serpent. And these were men who spent years, if not decades, on the oceans. And so they believed it was something they had never seen and was unique. And these are two paintings that depict that. Totally different is this nightshirt. We got a collection in about 10 years ago associated with the American Canoe Association, a recreational canoeing association and club with a long history. And the collection consisted mostly of papers, annuals and yearbooks, correspondence. But this nightshirt was also included, and it dates to the Prohibition era, and you can see that they were not too impressed with Prohibition because it's covered with images of champagne bottles. A lot of champagne corks are attached to it. So it really is kind of an oddball item. But what I like most about it is that we actually have a photo of King Neptune wearing it. So he's wearing the actual nightshirt that you see here. And that's it.
So keep in mind, I am from a medical library, and so there will be some graphic material here. I try not to be too graphic, but over time, it's difficult sometimes for us when we see medical objects and bodies. Like, these are things coming out of people's bodies that we don't, for those of us at the medical library, we sometimes don't stop and pause. So this is actually a good opportunity for us to stop and pause. So collecting the weird in Connecticut, brains, bodies, and bits is what I'm going to call this part. And what you see is a postcard. We were just talking about postcards a little earlier. Postcards in the late 19th century, early 20th century could be kind of morbid, and this is a good example of this. This is a genre of postcards related to medical students dissecting bodies. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were mom and dad and got this in the mail and said, oh, well, there's John. Wow, there's Johnny. This might be a very interesting object. But this is not a unusual thing. There are actually a number of postcards dealing with dissected bodies. And this was kind of a stamp of being a proud medical student. I can do this. I did this. And it was a way of becoming part of the medical community, is having a postcard, just like this. I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Harvey Cushing. I don't know if you've met him before. There's quite a number of details here. But the big thing is he's a Yale class of 1891 and plays baseball, doesn't do very well at baseball, and ends up going to medical school. He is, I think, fourth generation doctor out of Cleveland. He goes to medical school at Harvard, and then he goes to Johns Hopkins for his residency and becomes really fascinated with brains and brain injury. And if you think about this time period, it's 1900, 1910, 1920s, 1930s. Opening up someone's skull and messing around their brain is extremely dangerous. So Cushing begins to pioneer techniques, things that we may take for granted today, that stabilize people so that they can survive a removal of a tumor. So things like keeping track of blood pressure over the course of surgery. Of course we do this nowadays, but in this time period, that was not an innovation that was well known. He developed silver clips that would stem bleeding within the brain. And he would try to go into somebody's skull in multiple ways in order to get to the tumor and remove the tumor. So this is one reason I'm talking about him is because I'm from the Harvey Cushing John Hay Whitney Medical Library. He's a founder of our library, but even more, let's see what we got here. He's a founder of a collection called and the museum's called the Cushing Center. It's in the Cushing Whitney Medical Library, and we have lots of brains. Lots and lots of brains. So this is actually a picture from the older space. So once upon a time, the brains, Cushing began to collect brains and collect tumors from his patients. He operated on thousands of patients as a way of developing a kind of brain tumor registry. He's trying to classify different types of tumors. He's trying to understand what's going on. I guess we're jumping ahead to the Cushing Center. And the Cushing Tumor Registry, actually let me go back for one moment. Cushing Tumor Registry developed over the course of his career. When he retired, he spent most of his time in Boston, but when he retired, he came back to Yale, and he brought everything with him. Brains, tumors, lots of books, great books. We appreciate that immensely. And when he died in 1939, the brains got passed to someone else, and someone else, and someone else, until they finally got out of fashion in the 1960s and ended up in the sub-basement of the medical school dormitory. That's the space here. The medical students, being very thrifty people and very, very ingenious people, found a way of breaking into the room and developed a brain society where at one night, I don't know all the details, but they would break in, spend the night with the brains, and this room still exists, it's really gross, and live to tell about it. In 1994, there was a medical student who did his thesis, his thesis on this weird collection, or it wasn't weird for Yale, but it sounds weird now. And it brought the collection back to light. It took 15 years, and we had to clear out an oversized book stack, but the collection is now residing in the sub-basement of the Cushing Whitney Medical Library. It is the Cushing Center. And you can see it's quite a different space from what you would expect, what you saw in the previous picture. In our collection, we have things like a horse brain, so we found a horse skull to go with it. We have a polar bear brain. I'm not 100% certain of the purpose of that one, but it has become a space that it's open to the public, it's free and open. We have thousands of students come through. We had a group today of 42 students who were talking about a man by the name of Phineas Gage who survived a railroad rod through his head. And the connection to the Cushing Center, as you can see here, the students were able to talk about brains and get up close and personal. The brains are in all of us, right? But we don't ever get to see them. So the Cushing Center is really this space where people can kind of explore. For me, it's just this place of remembrance, because right here we have patients. Give me 1 second, because this is actually moving a little faster. There should be a stop there. Let me just go back. There we go. It's a place of remembrance. We have over 10,000 glass plate negatives of the patients. Today, your doctor doesn't go to you and say, "Hi, I'm going to take your full picture." But Cushing had his patients photographed to document the changes of their condition over the course of their time with him. So this is a space not only that's unusual, but it's also kind of a space of memory. Patients are important, and they contributed the materials. What we have here is a picture of Cushing as a bibliophile, so I'm going to change rapidly over. He's the founder of our library and collected very broadly. We also have medically themed movie posters, we have medically themed sheet music, we have medically themed comic books, we have all kinds of things. And our collection stands from the 12th to 21st century, so we have a lot in the collection. Another piece in the collection is this. This is a toxicology kit. Meet Mary Stannard. She one day went strawberry picking and never returned. In 1878, her father went searching for her and found her with her throat cut. So why do we have this? What I call this a murder kit. It's not really the official name, but it is what it is. Basically, Mary became pregnant by the reverend of the town that she was in, and it was a big scandal. And there was a suspicion that not only had her throat been cut, but that she had ingested arsenic, and that had also contributed to her death. So Yale, two doctors from Yale stepped in, Moses White, and created the contents. And this is a two-sided kit. I can only really get a good picture of the one. The contents of different parts of her body that were affected by arsenic as part of the trial, I think. I'm not 100% certain. What's really unusual about this is that I don't only have one, I have 3 of these kits in the collection having to do with arsenic and murder. So our collection only has books, but it has scientific and medical instruments and objects that are a little unusual. And the entire collection for the objects and instruments is by donation. So sometimes we get some strange stuff, and this is a good example of this. One final collection I just want to highlight are the Peter Parker papers. And yeah, no, not Spider-Man, guys. But a 19th century medical missionary to China. He graduated out of Yale Medical School in the 1830s, and he went over to Canton and opened up the first ophthalmology hospital, working on the eyes in Canton as part of his medical mission. And his hospital rapidly expanded to include more than just doctoring the eyes. I show a little picture here. I'm a little sensitive about this collection because we have a series of paintings, 80 paintings of Chinese patients with tumors, external tumors that could be cut off rapidly. And the reason why Peter Parker had the paintings done by an artist by the name of Lam Qua was because he wanted to bring these paintings back to America and other places and say, look at the great work that I'm doing. These are the kinds of tumors I'm seeing. I'm able to help convert people to Christianity by doing these medical miracles. And so it's a very strange collection. And I thought the paintings were a little unusual, but really what's unusual is the urinary calculi. So for those of you who don't know what urinary calculi is, it would be bladder stones, kidney stones. And so we have a collection of 19th century Chinese kidney stones. Thank you. That has to be the weirdest, because I couldn't quite figure it out. So I actually, last semester, actually in the spring, I had a student who said, Melissa, show me some things in your collection and tell me, let me see if I can do a paper on them. I said, okay. And I showed him 3 things. I didn't think he was going to take this, but he went for this one. And he actually did a 36-page paper on the origins of the urinary calculi, where they came from, why we had them, and it had a lot to do with people were fascinated with the composition of these like mineral balls that basically showed up in your bladder in the 19th century. We weren't the only collection. There are actually other collections full of urinary calculi, and I was laughing about the whale calculi as well, right? And so if you ever want to see a collection of urinary calculi, you're always welcome to come to the Cushing Whitney Medical Library, and we're happy to show that to you. It was actually photographed as well in the 19th century and became part of a Yale Medical Museum that no longer exists. So I'm going to end it there because I know we're short on time to some degree, but if you want to see more, follow us on Instagram. Certainly there's quite a bit more that you can see. We like to showcase different parts of our collection. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, for sharing some very bizarre and weird objects from your collections. And I encourage you to visit these museums as well as many others, because there are weird things in every museum's collection. So I wanted to start a little bit about our conversation with, I mentioned that we have over 4 4 million objects in our collection, and Mystic Seaport has over 500,000, and
Yeah, it's like a couple hundred
couple hundred thousand, and and I'm going to go out on a limb and say space is always a concern for where we're going to store these things. So why do we keep these weird things when we have space issues and when we're still collecting new stuff? What do you think is the value of keeping these weird objects?
You want to go for it?
No.
Go for it. Oh, for us, you know, these objects represent a part of history, a space in history. It may help explain things that otherwise could be unexplainable to a variety of people. So even the calculi, which to me don't make much sense, to the 19th century, to the doctors in that time period, they were the epitome of chemical analysis and modern science, or some, you know, cutting edge science and medicine. So even though they're a little strange to us now, I don't think they were really that strange in that time period. So we think a lot about context, and we're willing to give up that space just so we can think broadly about the world that we live in. So that's one aspect that comes to our mind.
For me, it's imperative now to collect these objects and to maintain these objects, because the human experience is quickly devolving away from actual objects to digitized versions of those things. And I can see on a daily basis when the students come in and they're taking the tour of the history exhibit and they're actually experiencing the primary source material and learning about it. It's amazing, and it's not something that they're doing on a screen. Of course, they want to take a picture of it, but that's so they can remember this experience of the object. And I think that can't really be captured in any other way except for experiencing the object itself in that context. So I think it's really important, because we're losing that in every other aspect of our lives. We're handing over all of our decision making to artificial intelligence on the counter in our kitchen, and you know, it scares me.
And I think for us it's similar to that, but I think it's a two-part answer in that. First is that it's historically significant that the narwhal tusk coat rack represents this important industry. It's associated with exploration. The New London whaling firms built the Librarian in New London. They built the hospital in New London, important to the community and the region. So it connects to this regional history in a significant way. So it's representative of that. But the other thing is, I'll admit that weird stuff is a good way to get people to pay attention. And so, and then once, sometimes you can kind of, I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes you can kind of bait people with something weird, get them to move closer to an exhibit case or a panel, and while they're there, they're going to pick up something else. They're going to read something else. They're going to learn something else. They're going to find meaning in something else. So sometimes it's, you know, these things are used as simply as a hook, really, to engage people. And if they work that way, I think that's a bonus. Yeah.
One thing when we were working on our exhibit, we tried to be conscious of putting things out that were weird in a cultural setting, and were we as one culture saying another culture was weird, trying to have that conversation. And when in a lot of your examples, there were things that might be considered inappropriate today that have ended up in our collections, whether they're items from endangered species, or they're cultural appropriation, or they're stuff that just should not be out of a community. And so there's this line between weird and controversial. And where do you find that balance between a controversial object versus a weird object? And you know, the story that you had of the skeleton that you eventually buried, like, are there things that are really controversial and we should be thinking about them differently than just they're weird in our collection?
Well, we have something that's in our possession but not yet in our collection that became incredibly controversial this past summer. Like all New England villages, we had a signpost, as ordered by the king, installed on the green in Waterbury in, I don't know, 16 something or other. And that signpost was there until this summer. when a young woman decided that it was not just a signpost, it was a whipping post, and that slaves had been chained to it and whipped. And so she reenacted that and put it on YouTube. And it became a very quick viral sensation. And the city's knee-jerk reaction was to remove it so that the public would stop talking about it. But when I was called and asked what I thought, I said, we don't know enough about the signpost to really answer it. So our team went and dug and did a lot of research, and they're still doing more research, and learned at that point that there was a whipping post and stocks that were removed a long time ago, and that the signpost continued to be a signpost. However, that particular signpost at one point was used for a public whipping of a person who had stolen something and didn't pay his court fees and received 30 lashes for not paying the court fees by the first name on the list who formed the Historical Society in the minutes up there. Mr. Kingsbury ordered that. And so that we did find that one person used that. So we're doing more research. We're actually going to pull it out and do an exhibition about it at some point this summer. We've also learned recently that it is maybe the 7th or 8th signpost since the original, and most likely has no piece of the original left to it because they kept using pieces over time to recreate the signpost. But that's a controversial object, and the city was completely divided. They still are. No one's supposed to actually know, so don't tell anybody that it's in the basement of the museum.
You know this is going on YouTube,
I
right?
know.
Okay.
It's actually been in the newspaper, and nobody actually said anything afterwards. But it remains a controversial piece because we can't prove or disprove how it was used. But my opinion was it should stay there, and we should inform people about it, the context of it, and make it a public conversation where it's always been for almost 300 years. But instead, it went to the basement of City Hall, and I got it into the basement of my building. So we're moving that forward. So sometimes you want to invite controversy with these objects.
We had a recent exhibition that we did in the library was New Lives for Old Specimens. And one part of the exhibition dealt with a collection that's on loan to the Cushing Center. It has nothing to do with Harvey Cushing, but is on loan in the center, and it has to do with fetal skulls. And unto itself, fetal skulls are charged. In the 1990s, a lot of medical schools destroyed their collections of fetal anomalies because of a lot of pushback. It's politically incorrect. I mean, it was insensitive to have babies that were deformed, in jars on display. And there are a few places in America that still show that. The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia is a very good example of that. But the idea is to use this as a way of talking about other things. For the fetal skulls, we didn't have any on exhibition. Actually, we did some 3D printing of it. But we talked about the project that an international team of people was doing who were looking at a variety of fetal skulls to better understand what was going on with them, what had happened, how did this build the understanding of embryology, right? And so it wasn't politically charged. It was a kind of a scientific and learning experience. For the medical library, we think about our audience too. Medical doctors may be willing to accept a broader range of, not controversy, but a broader range of different types of bodies without thinking, my gosh, maybe I should be thinking about this a little differently. So for us, we do try to keep a careful eye on that line, recognizing that we work both with the medical community, but we're also open to the broader world. Yeah.
I would love to open it up to anyone who might have a question from the audience.
You got a question?
David, go ahead.
I was wondering if you have any brains of famous or notorious people in your collection?
The question we usually get is Harvey Cushing's brain in that collection? And the answer is no, he got buried with his brain. Yes, we have one, but he's not famous to this time period. His name was Leonard Wood. And I can say his name because he's actually a well-known patient of Harvey Cushing. He was a physician, a Rough Rider in the Spanish-American War. And he came to Cushing early in Cushing's career with a tumor And Cushing had this long surgery and didn't know if he could take it out. He took it out. And the man lived for another 20 years. He was almost president of the United States at one point. He was politically, everyone knew him politically. And Leonard Wood went back to Cushing because his tumor recurred. Cushing operated on him, and unfortunately he died post-operatively. Cushing was devastated. This man was his friend, but he created a scrapbook, and we actually have Leonard Wood's brain, tumor number 1 from the first surgery and tumor number 2 from the second surgery. So we consider him the most famous patient that we know of in the Cushing collection. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I can spread them out throughout the, okay. I guess I'm going to start with Mr. Calabretta. What type of whale is that?
The kidney stone whale, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if we know. I don't remember. I have to confess, I didn't do my homework. But
What kind of whale was the one that the guy took across America in the train?
Oh, yeah, that too.
that was, I think, a right whale.
Okay.
Yeah.
If only they'd had a corpse preserver.
Yeah, right.
Right. That
Yeah.
would help.
Did he sell it to Texaco for?
No, no.
The spotting of the serpent, did they keep like very detailed records about where they were when it was spotted, what time of day?
Yeah.
How long after their last portion of rum was spotted?
Yeah.
You know, things like-
Well-
I mean, it's very specifically detailed.
There's a whole history of sea serpents, and there's a lot of documentation, and we don't have a lot of visual documentation, but in our manuscripts collection and our rare books collection, there was a Gloucester sea serpent off the coast of Massachusetts, and appeared, there were articles in the newspapers over a long period of time, and it was a pretty common, or not an uncommon thing, and again, it's a good example of the public was fascinated with this kind of stuff because it was mysterious.
They saw mermaids too.
Yeah, but I think it had a lot of credibility in its day because, the British Navy was highly respected, and these were career officers. It wasn't just, some lowly sailor on the ship who had gotten into the grog barrel. It was a number of officers, and so people took it pretty seriously at the time.
For Melissa, in the toxicology murder kit, the contents of that kit, was that forensic evidence from?
I think it was. So this is one of those opportunities. Well, you're all welcome to come and research this kit. What's great about Mary, what's sad and great about Mary is that I discovered that there's actually some scrapbooks and other material in the Yale Law School. So at some point we're going to put the pieces together and figure it out. I think it was actually a type of evidence, and this is 1870s. This is relatively early to show this is arsenic, and these bottles are extraordinarily precise in all different parts of the body. It's fascinating, but it's weird that I have 3 of them, and I don't know if that was just a fad that had taken on at that time period, just for court purposes or what. Yeah.
Did they ever catch the murderer?
Oh, they knew the Reverend had killed her.
They knew.
They quickly identified him as the culprit behind her murder. Yes.
The amount of research that goes into identifying objects in our collection is pretty amazing. The record keeping over the hundreds of years that we've been around varies greatly. And so one of the things that we are doing now today is really trying to capture the story behind the object, not just take in the object itself for its aesthetic purpose or just its material object purpose, but to capture that context and that story, because without it, the curators in the future are going to curse my name as I sometimes shake my fist at the curators of the past. And so we do uncover these objects and then have to research and find out a lot of backstory that is not at all in our records or catalogs.
Yeah, that's an important point. I know, when we have groups come through our storage area, especially school groups, I like to make the point that it is that information, it's that documentation, and it's the stories about the associated people, who made it or who used it or why was it kept, or all those things. And without that, they're just pieces of wood and glass and metal. So it's the documentation is critical.
Are there any weird things that you have your eye on that are not in your collection that you're like, we'd love to get a hold of it?
Other than Chomper's head, the mascot head? Anyone want to start? This leads into one of what was going to be my closing question, so maybe since we're running out of time. I'm always thinking about what are the objects from today that I should be collecting. For a while, I think National Park Service had, I don't know if this is still the policy, but they didn't collect anything that was less than 50 years old because they wanted to have that length of time to kind of have that perspective of is it valuable? Is it really going to be something that's representative of that time period? I don't think we have that luxury. We're such a disposable culture that if we're not collecting some things right now, are they going to be around in 5 years to even find them when we go, oh, no, that was really important. That was a real iconic object of 2018. So I'm always thinking about, and we have it upstairs in the exhibit, should we be putting that fidget spinner that was really popular? Is it still popular? I don't have kids, tell me. Should we be putting that into the collection? I'm always thinking about
Only if you have a
that
pet
stuff.
rock in your collection already.
Right. And where's the pet rock?
Yeah.
I will say, I want more underwear in our collection. We don't, everyone
You
saves
mean
their
contemporary underwear?
contemporary
Like,
underwear.
not Victoria's Secret sort of stuff?
Sure. Everyone saves their wedding dress. I don't need any more wedding dresses, but undergarments, like we don't have a pair of Spanx in our collection. For those women who don't know what Spanx are, it's an undergarment that keeps you nice and contained under your clothing. It's the modern day girdle. But we don't have a pair of Spanx, and that's a huge thing in fashion. We have about 4,000 objects in our costume and textile collection, so it's a pretty significant collection here at the Historical Society. So I'm always thinking about things that we should be collecting.
We are actively collecting the things that are manufactured in and around Waterbury today. So I was thrilled to get coin-operated laundry things that they make because they're no longer putting coins in coin-operated laundry anymore. They're using credit cards in them. So we have the credit card reader one, but I was like, do you have the coin one too that you made for like 70 years? And like, oh yeah, we have one of those. So that we're collecting those sorts of things from the manufacturers that have, like Waterbury still manufactures tons of stuff. It's just now it takes fewer people and computers do a lot of the work, but it's all still metal. So we're adding to the incredibly vast collection of brass objects that we have that go all the way back to those original things that were, those buckets. We all have lots of hand-forged buckets and tools and things, but we're still actively collecting. Like what I really should have is an MRI machine because Waterbury is the place that makes the superconductor wire that is inside the MRI machine that enables the giant magnet to do magnetic resonance imaging for us. And it's the only, and they're in Waterbury because the Chase Company during the Second World War expanded their workbench to be a mile long in order to make super long pipes for the war. And this company that exists in Norway needed a mile to stretch the rod in order to make the coil that then wraps around. So I keep thinking, I need an MRI machine, but I don't know where I'll put it,
Right.
Because that's big. Yeah, and this is the only place in the world they make the superconductor wire. It is in Waterbury. So like we're doing weird stuff like that you would never know, but it's amazing, and we should have one.
I think one way we look at it is because we have the ships, we're interested in knowing what the sailors had and brought with them on the ship, and we'd like to know everything. We'd like to know what kind of underwear they had. I mean, we'd like to know if they had blankets or a quilt from home on their bunk. We'd like to know, if they hung something up. We have a fishing schooner from the 1920s. We'd like to know what the fishermen ate, how many canned goods, what type of canned goods. And so, we think about that in the present tense. And we did a section on the Navy in an exhibit that was open for about 15 years, just closed 2 years ago. But we documented the experiences of a submarine sailor and his family. And he was about to leave on a 6-month voyage, and before he left, I said, when you get back, can we have everything that you can spare that's going with you on this trip? And so we got his sneakers, we got his laundry bag, we got paperback books that he read. This was about 1990, I think. We got his Walkman, which was a musical listening device in the old days. We got drawings that his daughters had done, family photographs that he had pasted up on his bunk, and parts of his uniform, but the casual clothing, not the fancy uniform, the jeans and the working clothes. So, the way I thought about it was that this is all stuff that we wish we had from 1843, and so that's one way to look at it. And I think another thing too about collecting the present is that if something is sort of marketed or described as collectible, it probably isn't. If it's from a set of collectible plates or a collectible this or a collectible that, it's so mass produced and marketed that there's a good chance that there are tons of them out there. So sometimes that's a clue that maybe that's not as much of a priority as collecting something that's a little more rare.
One of the most endangered things for us nowadays is the patient record. The paper record that your doctors have, that's a source of incredible information about what was ailing, what's ailing people in this day and age, or how it changes over time. It's going to be, those records are very critical, but those are the things that have disappeared very quickly. If your doctors may not keep their record, per state law or something like that for, beyond 7 years. So, and a lot of the time we get people who are like, oh my gosh, my grandfather was in the hospital at such and such a time, and now I have this disease. How do I, can I find out more about his record? Now, we're not the actual records for the Yale New Haven Hospital, but it's these kinds of questions that I think haunt us, and it will haunt us even 100 years from now, especially now that everything's going to digital, making sure that there's a way to do digital preservation. So for us, something that I want to see is the paper record, and then making sure that we can keep track of the digital record, and that there's not a way of wiping out everything, because there are a lot of questions in different families that really do matter based on the patient record. So that's us. Let's see, different questions.
Is there anything in the medical library that relates to DNA?
Yes, we have something called the Friedman DNA collection, and what it is a collection of all the major works in DNA that is signed off by some of the biggest names. So Crick and Watson, for example, who discovered the DNA strand with a variety of other people. We have that collection in here, but we do not have like physical DNA collection, because Yale Medical School is vast and there's DNA in different laboratories all over the place. So, and again, it's weird, we're a library. The Cushing Center is a very different anomaly, and it kind of changed the nature of the entire space when we added in 2010 this whole museum full of brains. Yeah.
How has your sense of history been changed as you engaged in your work at serving Yale Medical School, for example? How has your sense of making history flesh out changed?
What's very interesting about working with Yale Medical School and the program in history of medicine, these are the kinds of questions that I see. I think that's really what has helped. I can't learn this all by myself. There's no way. So when I told you about the urinary calculi, and I looked at this collection, I said, I don't know what to make of this collection. It was being able to reach out to a community of people and say, here, try, see if you can find something about this. So I've had somebody, discover so much more about that collection. There was, we have a lead nipple shield, which was used in we have a lot of stuff, in the 18th and 19th century for women who were breastfeeding. And another student focused on this object and came up with a huge paper in a way that I would never expect. So it really is, I think it's expanded, really, my understanding of history and medicine, yeah.
I say it all the time with our researchers. I love when the researchers come in because they have their questions formulated. They're looking at our art collection with a different lens, and what they discover always helps inform what we know about it. And if you haven't figured this out yet, just because someone's title is curator, it actually doesn't mean that they know what their collection is about. There's no way that any of us, and and my title is Chief Curator of the Connecticut Historical Society. So people think that I know everything about Connecticut history. I don't. I will be totally honest about that. But we have amazing objects, and we can do the research, and we can find the experts, and we can pull that story together. But there's no way that I'm a walking encyclopedia Google up here. That I don't have enough brain power for that. I'm going to end with David, and then if you want to talk to them afterwards, see if they have some time. But we'll let the group disperse after David.
This question is really related to Mystic Seaport. Usually when a museum collects an object, it wants the original, it wants everything intact. Repairs are a bad thing, refinishing is a real thing, it's a bad thing. But you have boats that
Right.
are kind of living in a sense.
Yeah.
And the Morgan, for example, and I don't know how much original is left on the Morgan, and I'm just curious, how do you deal with preserving original things on objects that get weathered and have to be weathered in order to provide the experience that you provide, which is somewhat unique?
Yeah, it's a good question, and not a lot of the Morgan is still original. Some of it is, but the thing about boats and watercraft in general are such a challenge because most of the older ones are wood, and wood doesn't like to be in water, and that's what this was designed to do. So you're kind of behind the 8 ball from the time the ship is launched. You're fighting the elements, and so. We have really what is the only preservation shipyard in the United States, and so we're unique that way, and we try to do things the right way. And the other thing we do is document everything. And with computer technology now, we can do an even better job of that. So there's a very thorough record of what's original and what isn't, and we keep a lot of the original material, even if it's removed. Not all of it, but we keep a lot of it. So I think mostly it's about documentation and keeping you don't want to mislead someone coming along 50 years from now. So make it clear what's replaced and what isn't.
We have those same issues even though we don't have boats. You have it with all historical objects. You have it with paintings. Like you want to continue to keep them safe and stable as you are preserving it. I'm just a steward for this time at this museum, and there were people before me, and there will be people for 140 years after me. But during my tenure, I want to make sure that the things are safe and that they're being well cared for. So, the rubber desk has been repaired since I've been there 6 times. 6 years, it's been repaired 12 times, like twice a year. Every year, we have to have some thing repaired on it, because it just doesn't like being out in a room that has heat and cool. We try really hard to keep the humidity the same and the temperature the same, but you don't always succeed.
So thank you
Thank
to
you.
our panelists. This was a really great conversation. And thank you again for coming. The That's Weird exhibit is on view through April, so if you haven't seen it or you want to see it again or want to bring back a friend, we'd love to have you. We do have behind-the-scenes tours where we take people into collection storage. Those are usually once a month, and they're on different themes, so there's flyers out there. Natalie, who started us off, is our adult programs manager, and there's some great programs coming up along the That's Weird theme. Do you want to mention them real fast, Natalie?
Yeah, I would love to. On March 1st, we're going to have the Smithsonian Ambassador at Large, Richard Curran, come here to talk he wrote a book called The Smithsonian's 101 Objects that made American 101 Objects. And he's going to come here and talk about some of those objects, and a few of them have Connecticut connections, such as Katharine Hepburn's Oscars are featured in his book. So that's going to be great. And then we have an event in April with Sarah Lohman, who's a food historian, who's going to come and talk about weird food in America and how our tastes about what's good and what's disgusting have changed a lot over the last couple centuries. So there are flyers out there on the front table. Please take one home with you.
So again, thank you for coming and have a good evening.
Thank you.